Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, and welcome to the Workforce Webinar Series, Role of State and Local Workforce Boards. We're just going to get started in just a minute as more people are logging on, so please sit tight, and thank you so much for joining us today. Hello, everyone. I see that we have a number of people logged on, so thank you so much for joining us. We're just going to get started with the webinar. First off, my name is Tori Bahi from Ross Strategic, and I am here supporting EPA, and I'll be handling the logistics of the webinar today. And as always, thank you all so much for taking time out of your hectic schedules to join us and to learn more about the workforce boards on the state and local level. Speakers are really excited to share their valuable information with everyone. And before we get started with these wonderful presentations, I'm just going to go over some webinar logistics. First, this webinar is being recorded. We'll be sending out the webinar recording and a copy of the presentation slides within a few days after the webinar. Participants will be in listen-only mode. However, we encourage you to engage, and one way you can do that is if you have any questions for the speakers as we go through the presentations, please use the Q&A function as highlighted in that red box down below. We'll be monitoring these questions, and during the Q&A session, we'll be trying to go through as many of those as possible. If you happen to have any technical difficulties, you can use the chat function, and our team will be monitoring those as well. And like I mentioned, we'll be sending out the webinar slides and recording after the webinar, and we'll be sending these out to everyone who has registered, not only those who have attended, but everyone that has registered in case they were unable to make the webinar. If at any point during the webinar you are having technical audio difficulties and you are listening in through your computer, you're always more than welcome to call in through any of these phone numbers, and there's the webinar ID in there as well. So again, if you're having any audio difficulties, you can call in with one of these numbers. And before we get started again with the presentations, we just want to get a sense of who we have in the audience. So you should see a box pop up on your window with the poll. And we just ask it, please indicate the sector that you work in. And we have utility, state or local government, federal government, consultant, academia/educator, or other. And if for some reason you do not see the poll box open up, you can always chat in your response as well. And I'll give everyone a couple seconds to answer that. All right, everyone, thank you so much for entering your results. It seems that we have about 42% of our audience is state or local government, with utility and other being the other sector. So thank you so much. And additionally, this workforce webinar series is just one of many webinars that we've done in the past. In order to check out more resources and updates, there is this website here that you can check out on EPA's website. We are having another webinar tentatively scheduled for December 2020, And if you've registered for this webinar, you've already enrolled in our mailing list. So when we do have the date and time solidified for the December webinar, we'll be sending that out to the mailing list, and you can register for that webinar as well. And after the webinar, when we send out the recording and the slide deck, we'll also include this flyer that we have that includes the information from the previous the previous webinars, I apologize, from the past couple months. So thank you all. And I'm going to hand it over to Deborah from EPA. Deborah?
Hi, thank you, Tori. I'm Deborah Box-Renwick. I am an environmental engineer in EPA's Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water, and I'm going to be moderating the webinar today. I just want to put in an additional plug for that EPA.gov workforce website that you can find a bunch of past produced resources there, but also stay tuned, because as new things are coming out this fall, that is the place where you'll be able to find them. So I would bookmark that. Today we are so excited to have three speakers talking about the role of state and local workforce boards. And we really think that this is a great underutilized resource for the water sector workforce that hopefully by the end of today everyone will know more about and be able to use this to improve your recruiting and your workforce development. So first we're going to hear from Ron Painter, and he is the President and CEO of the National Association of Workforce Boards. Take it away, Ron.
Okay, thanks, Deborah. I appreciate that. I want to say also my appreciation for being here today, and I hope I can answer some of the questions that you have. We're happy to give it a try. I want to talk a little bit about what we are as the National Association of Workforce Boards. I want to talk a little bit about the structure of workforce boards, and then we have a great local board director here in Katie to join you and talk about what this looks like when you're in the field. I was a local director in Pittsburgh, so I have some understanding of how the locals operate, but it's great to have Katie talk about what's going on now. So Tori, you want to hit the next slide? As the National Association of Workforce Boards, our job is, or our vocation, our mission is to support the work of the nation's nearly 550 local business-led workforce boards. The boards are by law, and we'll talk more about how you become a member, but the boards are by law a majority private sector. The chair of the board must be from the private sector as well. So it really, WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which all of the boards have, really has put a focus on this, the engagement of the private sector in the work of the boards. We do, and you can hit the next slide, Tori, thanks. So we do, our work comes in kind of three parts. Advocacy, which today is an example of how we advocate for the local boards in explaining the work of the boards. But as you can imagine, we also do a lot of work with Capitol Hill. We do work with the administration, and we are doing an increasing amount of work with associations and private businesses as they try to maximize, I guess, the talent pipeline and part of what local boards can do. We do this also, do our work through promising practices. What do we think is working in a particular area? How do we share that with other areas that are part of what our work? We do an annual meeting in Washington, D.C. called the Forum. It was virtual this year, but it's also where we talk about the projects that people have been working on, the circumstances that have made it successful or helped it be successful, and a lot of conversation around policy. at the federal and state level. And thirdly, then, is communications. We do a lot of work back and forth. Boards that are trying to find another board that may have taken on a particular project or does something well. How do we do that? Next slide, Tori. So our work at the national level, we've begun this process because the local boards are a majority from the private sector. We started to feel that we needed more direct advice from business about the issues that we are experiencing. Things like the credentials and the certifications and what are essential skills and how do we do the talent pipeline and what's the collaboration with education. So you can see some of the partners that we're working with. We're really excited that last week Google and Snap-on Tools has joined the Business Alliance. So it continues to help us better understand what is happening across the country. Next slide. So when we look at the public workforce system, the question always is okay, so where's the money? Let's follow the money. How does it happen? And we're certainly no different. So the WIOA, we're going to talk about how WIOA reaches the boards, and that is that Congress appropriates. It appropriates money through the 500 block of the federal budget. It then comes to local workforce, or comes to the U.S. Department of Labor. It's then governed by a formula, and that formula applies first to the states. There's 3 parts to it, and then inside the state. That same formula then goes to however many local workforce boards are in that state. There are several states that are what we call single states. Utah, the Dakotas, Wyoming, Montana, New Hampshire, Vermont, I said Utah, are examples of single states. So there's only the state workforce board in those states. So you see that then from the Department of Labor, there is a contract with the governor. The governor can withhold 15% of the funds. 85% of the money must go from them to local workforce boards. In the case of the single state, that money stays at the state level. So they act both as the local and the state. WIOA again refers to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. It was passed in 2014. So we'll talk more about what the boards do, but I think there's always a little bit of good news, bad news in all of this stuff. First, the bad news is that it takes a while for the funds to get to the local area. The good news is that actually this is a well-established contract process. So money can very quickly be contracted and get to the local level. We still have hope that we will see that in play as Congress debates what do we do around the recovery. So next slide, Tori. So then, what is this local workforce development board, and how does it operate? Tori, next slide. So first of all, understand that there is, as I mentioned, the state workforce board, and it's certain, and as you can imagine, it looks across the state to look at different sectors, industry sectors across the state, to look at different situations. We've seen, because of the formula, some funky things happen in terms of budgets being changed year to year because of the factors. So sometimes the state will come in and they will try to even that out. The state will take on statewide initiatives that the whole system, workforce development system, needs. What's key to me to the work of local workforce boards is labor market data and labor market dynamics. Most of us got hired ourselves. We had that singular experience of we got hired. Somebody called us, emailed us, walked around the desk back in other days, or I guess now on a video chat, told us everything was great and welcome aboard. So we think, when you think about the US as a whole, there's over 100 million transactions in the US labor market each year. People get hired, people get fired, people change jobs. So there's 100 million of those transactions a year. So it's a really dynamic market that a local workforce board, that we have to look at the federal level, but a local workforce board has to contend with what's happening in my region. And that is certainly, that labor market data is certainly supplemented by data like, what does my housing look like? What does transportation look like? What does my childcare network look like? What does my career and tech schools, what do they look like? What does that system look like? What are my community colleges doing? What are my post-secondaries doing with regard to the skills that I am seeing as needed in my regional labor market, according to the industry sectors that are critical to us in the occupations? So part of the work of the local workforce board is a lot of convening of partners across the workforce development system. Tori, next slide. In total, across the country, especially this year, more than 1 in 12 American workers will touch the workforce development system that the boards are a part of and help oversee. Because of the funding constraints, about 1.2 million of those people will receive intense services, and about 50% of them will end up with an occupational credential. Again, partly because of the funding, but also because WIOA is the funder of last resort for tuition. So part of what Katie's got to do is working with her learning providers is figure out, does somebody qualify for Pell? Do they qualify for some other scholarship, and then local money? More than 80% of the individuals that go through this intensive services, so think about skill assessments, think about career planning and development, and an understanding, helping you understand what your skills look like relative to the skills in demand in the labor market, and then helping you find, maybe help pay part of the tuition, books, supplies, fees, to get you 80% of those people enter employment within 6 months of our engagement. Next slide. So this is, and I certainly won't go into all of this, but when you, as we look at this, as Katie looks at this, these are the 16 activities, if you will, that the federal legislation lays out that workforce boards should be involved in. And you notice things in there like they got to worry about accessibility. They got to worry about like who's benefiting from our services. All of the boards are governed by performance standards. You see that mentioned in here, negotiation of local performance. What are you going to do in terms of the number of people you deal with who enter employment, wage rates, how long does somebody stay in a labor market? So all of these things are inside what the work of a local board is. Next slide, Katie. Or Tori, next slide, thanks. So how do you get onto one of these local boards? Well, it's a different process between the state and the locals. So at the local level, again, 51% of the board must be from business. Labor is 20% of the board. So it's organized labor. It's figuring out if you don't have a lot of that or you need more, how do you create that employee voice? It includes adult education and literacy providers, who are a part of, by the way, WIOA. It includes higher education representation, government and economic development, Wagner-Pizer, which is the employment service, and it includes Voc Rehab. It may include, and this is where you get into the different sizes of the board. Some boards are about 17 members, some boards are 40 members, because they've made a decision to include community-based organizations, youth, transportation, and other people on the board. Next slide. So how do you engage? And this is probably the one of the more important slides, or if not the most important slide in my presentation. So I think when you think about how do I approach the workforce board, the thing to understand is you're really coming to a business-to-business conversation. The boards are governed by these performance outcome metrics. So they have in a sense, a bottom line in terms of, who's entering employment? How have you determined critical industries? How have you looked at critical occupations? How are you recruiting people into those occupations? Who's entering employment? How many of those people are getting credentials? How many of those people are being retained in the labor market? Oh, by the way, what are their wages in the labor market? So when you come to the workforce board, you're coming because you have business needs. You have skills you can't find. You have people that you're trying to reach. With a lot of the conversation right now and the focus nationally on racial equity, understand that workforce boards tap in to all kinds of markets, all kinds of job seekers. So that a lot of times when you're trying to recruit, your best friend can be the local workforce board in their ability to reach a lot of different populations. So it's a business to business conversation. Don't come thinking you want to do, like, oh, this is the good thing to do, or this is a nice thing to do. No, you have business needs, so does the board. So get right to the business to business conversation. Board membership, local elected officials appoint the workforce board because the board is in a partnership, a collaboration with local elected officials. So local elected officials appoint members to the workforce board. So take a look at your local workforce board. Maybe your sector isn't represented. Maybe you should advocate with local elected officials that, hey, take a look at us. We need to be on the board. And so that's part of it. You could also help us, contact us. You can look at a website called workforceinvestmentworks.com. If you're not sure who your local workforce board is, Workforce Investment Works can lead you to your local board. And then again, you can write to us. Next slide, Tori, thanks. I think these are things that the local board is going to be looking at. Who's hiring? What are the skills? Who's unemployed? Right now, we're doing a lot of work in looking at one of my favorite data points that the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out called U6 data. U6 data is that category of people that are kind of attached to the labor market, but maybe aren't. They can't find full-time employment, so they're working part-time, they're trying to get back into the labor market, or now they're slipping into long-term unemployed. So we're really asking a lot of questions now about this U6 data. Next slide. I think, and you can go on to the next one. These are some of the issues that we're trying to look at. So when you think about a workforce board and you think about the system that it's in, think about things like what Katie's contending with are things like e-learning and mobile learning. What credentials are valid in my labor market? What credentials can I direct more training money toward? How can I encourage my learning providers to get engaged in producing more people with a particular credential? Micro-badging, how do I get people to get a little bit of skill, get better at their skill, the proficiency of their skill. And then also we're doing a lot of work nationally on something called interoperable learning records. In other words, how do we as individuals own and keep track of the credentials and the micro-badging and what we see as proficiency? You can go to the next one, Tori. So I think also the issues that we face, there's a lot of conversation around reshoring the supply chain. If you think back to February of 2020, not that long ago, unemployment in some places was hovering around 3%. So two things there. One, the need to reskill a significant part of the U.S. labor force is really out there. It's a really, it's a big issue. But also think for you, remember, you're competing in a labor market for somebody's talent. So you really do, if you've not thought about why should somebody come to work for you, or why should they come into your industry, you really have to sit back and think about that. In WIOA, the customer has choice about what learning provider, what kind of training they may want. And they're looking at industries. Maybe their uncle is, a journeyman electrician, or their aunt is a journeyman plumber. And man, they really like that independence. Well, it's not so far away from what you all do. Maybe you can convince them that you're a good option. I think you need to also be cognizant, as workforce boards are, that the pandemic has devastated state and local budgets. I don't envy states right now in the decisions that they're going to have to make around how do they contend with shortfalls. And I think, as I mentioned early on, we do a lot of work on the Hill. A lot of that has to do with, where will the funds come from? We saw we saw the House try to appropriate money for workforce development in the COVID relief. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. So Tori, you can go to the next slide. So if you want to learn more, or you have a topic you want us to explore in depth, we do a podcast called Workforce Central. You can find us in iTunes or Google Play. So that's like the 32,000 foot. That's like if you felt safe in hanging out with me on an airplane, that's kind of the view we've just worked through or talked through. I am really excited to have, to have a local director here hanging out with me, because Katie Condit from Workforce Central in Tacoma, Washington. Katie, you can tell them really like what happens, what a director does. So it's a pleasure for me to hand this over to Katie.
Thanks, Ron. Gosh, that was such a thorough overview. I will take the baton and do my best to really clarify and demystify the often nebulous role in terms of what it looks like on the ground here in Pierce County. Tori, first slide. So, if you think about it really simply, how workforce development works, a strong economy should work for everyone. We know, as Ron alluded to, that historically and currently this has been exacerbated by COVID, but our economy does not work for everyone. There are significant disparities between populations in Pierce County and across the country in terms of economic prosperity. What's true is that employers need access to workers with the right skill sets on one side, and workers need access to training and education programs to build their in-demand skills. And so workforce development councils, which is what Workforce Central is, we really monitor the entire local economy to figure out where gaps exist in this matchmaking process, if you will. We have that balcony systems level view and are really working to align and enhance opportunities to bridge gaps between employers and potential workforce. And so, the metaphor we use is we're air traffic controllers for the workforce system in terms of monitoring, measuring, and leading. Tori, next slide. And so we, again, from a kind of backbone lens, backbone to the workforce development systems, we partner with and convene businesses, educators, policymakers, job seekers, organized labor, recognizing that no entity can do this alone. It takes businesses and policymakers to come together to ensure that incoming workforce, upskilling, reskilled workforce is funded and supported to move into current industry needs. For example, no single entity can do it alone, and so we coordinate that system as local boards. Here in Pierce County, we look across the county at what businesses, what employers are coming in. We're monitoring data regularly to see where positions and skill gaps are emerging, and where workforce development is headed. And so again, from that real data-driven perspective that Ron mentioned, it is about using that to implement solutions that work. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means in practice. But in the next few slides, I've really tried to delineate what does that mean? Like, what do we actually do as local workforce boards? For everyone on this call, if you live in the country, you have a local workforce board. And so we are on the ground in a role of service to workforce development systems. So the first role we play, next slide, is you heard Ron talk about WIOA funds that come down from the federal level and eventually reach the local level. And so our first role is in service to job seekers. So as a local workforce board, we use those funds to facilitate and fund local providers. So that can look different in any given area, but local providers then work directly with job seekers to provide coaching, training, job connection opportunities. And so we are the facilitator and the steward of those funds as local workforce boards. We don't provide those services, but we again take that systems level balcony view to see and assess what's needed in our community, and then find the providers who can do that work for job seekers. Next slide. The other service we provide is directly to employers and businesses. And so, an example from just last week is if we have a major business moving into town that requires hiring, upskilling, or reskilling of 50 plus employees, we can work to invest in training. We can support with recruitment and screening of potential employee pools. We can work with businesses and to assess culture and retention and what that looks like on the ground for workers. So that services for employers and businesses is a key bucket of work for us. We also invest in and support education and training pathways. So part of that assessing the gaps is looking at current skill sets that are needed, working with education systems to develop clearer, quicker, more robust in some cases, but industry-informed pathways and training programs into those high-demand, high-quality jobs. And so we play a key role in investing and facilitating the development of education and training opportunities that may not look like a traditional 4-year degree in some cases, or even a 2-year certification program, but may be accelerated or may start earlier in the span of a young person's training. And so, especially to meet the COVID economy and relief and recovery moving forwards, we're thinking differently about what education and training looks like on the ground. The fourth bucket that I want to highlight is the data and research component. The economy, especially recently, has just been shifting so quickly and looks very different week to week. And so we have a critical responsibility to our local, not only businesses, but also job seekers to illuminate what is happening in the labor market, where and how the data are shifting, and what that means for folks on the ground. And so it's that data and research that really drives our local priorities. So as one of many boards across the country, we will often look to other areas to see what's working best and iterate on best practices so that we're meeting our community at the time they're in. And lastly, our role that ties this all together is as a convener and aligner. As I mentioned earlier, no single sector or industry or organization can do workforce systems alone. And so we will bring together stakeholders from across sectors to co-design what these systems look like. A great example is, if we're developing a training pathway, or if one already exists in healthcare, we're going to, as the Workforce Board, pull together a group of 15 experts in different healthcare fields in our region to inform that curriculum, inform what coursework should look like, and inform what potential entry into meaningful work experience looks like. And so from that convener standpoint, we're often bringing together industry consortium and businesses to inform education and training. Next slide. So what does this look like in practice? I'll give you some examples in the last 6 months on the ground here. In practice, it looks like our workforce board is designing and coordinating regional skilled trades fairs, for example, for young people and adults across the region and employers. We're, as I mentioned, pulling together employer and industry consortiums to inform education pathways on the ground in real time. We are developing and helping lead alongside businesses recruitment and retention plans for their employees and for their workforce. We are contracting with organizations to provide those direct services I talked about, career coaching, career pathway, job connection services to youth, adults, and dislocated workers. And so that's, again, our role in stewarding funds to local entities who are providing those services to job seekers. We play a really big role in rapid response. So right now across the country, companies are doing mass layoffs. Our role in rapid response is to go immediately into those companies and meet with their staff who are being laid off or furloughed to directly plug them into service right away and help them understand how their skills might transfer and what their next steps might be. So there's a critical rapid response component to that. And our mechanism for delivering many of these services is through WorkSource. So across the country exist local WorkSource centers. Many of you are likely familiar, and partners who deliver these services staff those centers. And so you'll often walk into your local WorkSource center for anything from job coaching to resume building to connection to open opportunities that might be available. And those centers are staffed by multiple partners in Pierce County who are there to wrap around job seekers and businesses to meet their needs. Next slide. So those are some examples of on-the-ground practice. It is really critical from a local workforce board to call out that we are led by our chief local elected officials, as well as our Workforce Development Council, which is primarily driven by the private sector. As Ron mentioned, at least 51% of those board members need to come from business. And so, you know, that circle at the bottom is Workforce Central. That is our team and our organization. And we often look at our mission as carrying out the vision of the chief local elected officials and the Workforce Development Council, but then also aligning that vision to what we're hearing from job seekers and their experience on the ground. So grass tops, grassroots, and our role is pulling that vision together to deliver services in Pierce County. So if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always happy to illuminate what our work looks like on the ground. I didn't go too deep into examples because I'm really excited to introduce Nath Maver, who is with Laborers Local 252 and is also a board member on our Workforce Development Council, who's going to give you a really compelling example of what aligned investment in a workforce pathway has looked like in Pierce County. And so I will stop right there and am thrilled to turn it over to Nath.
Thank you, Katie. And Ron, Katie, thanks for the successful passing off of this parachute as we get closer to ground eyes view. And thank you everybody for being here this afternoon. And I think key to this as a board member and as somebody involved in the economic development system, it's all about the partnerships. We can't go at this alone. And there's some really unique things that have, I guess, bubbled up here in Tacoma when it comes to like stormwater management and how we can start training the next generation. Across this country, we're seeing the graying and the silver tsunami of construction trades and skilled trades retirees, freeing up opportunities, but we want to make sure that we're training the youth and folks to fill those gaps that are being created. And so unique to this program, and Tori, I think this would be a good time to go to the next slide. We had there's some goals that were established, and one is to prepare high school students for entry-level positions in green jobs. And this aligned really well with our workforce strategic plan to target disconnected young adults and prevent young adults between the ages of 16 to 24 to prevent them from being disconnected from the workforce system. And we wanted, the program wanted to have a diverse and inclusive group of high school students to get understanding of stormwater management and opportunities during the summer over a 6-week period. This all happened last summer, and introduced both them and their families to opportunities for work in environmental services. So there was a bunch of hands-on learning, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, as well as field trips and lunch and learns and that. And when I heard about this program, I also made sure that we were able to get some of our apprenticeship coordinators from the laborers into those lunch and learns so that the kids could hear about the opportunities that they had with the credentials and trainings that they would receive over these 6 weeks. Next slide. So what did they learn? Well, they wanted to make sure that there were certification and skills that these students could take and be job ready. So the program was established to, get their CPR and their first aid card. They learned about flagging and got that certification. They were also certified in erosion and sediment control from the Washington State, as well as a HAZWOPER cert, and got their OSHA 10. Any of these kids, when they finished up these 6 weeks, they could walk to our hiring hall or any other hall that does hiring, not just with labor unions, and gotten on a dispatch list and could have been easily dispatched out at $25 plus an hour. They also had some scientific training with chain of custody and water sampling techniques. And part of this is that Tacoma has a really unique position. We have a Superfund site that was established back in the 90s, the Foss Waterway, and we sit adjacent to the Puget Sound. And vital to that is making sure that our water that discharges into there is clean and doesn't have a negative impact on our orcas and the salmon and all the life there. And we are really proud of the work we've done there. And as we've been working with the EPA and other organizations to clean that up, one of the things that they've built is near a park. We have a 5,500 square foot facility that treats stormwater as it runs off. It manages about 754 acres of stormwater just naturally. And if you can see my icon here, it's super tiny on my screen, but there's a picture of it there. If you look up the Point Defiance Regional Stormwater Treatment Facility, they're able to take field trips to this and learn about how dirty the water is coming off of that acreage, which is it's an urban setting, as it enters the top of the facility, and then as it comes out the bottom, they can see the difference in that. And they had a lot of opportunities like that to learn those things. Again, building their ability to go into the workforce with knowledge and the ability to get a job immediately, which is super exciting. And they also earned some high school credits towards in the CTE program here in the Tacoma School District. Next slide. One once they've done all this, they also partnered with another group called Orcas Love Rain Gardens. And the Tacoma School District was in the process of building new and working on many of their school properties. And so we put them to work there, and they helped build rain gardens on public school sites. I think it was at 2 different places. Again, taking what they learned in the classroom and applying it practically in a hands-on fashion at those school sites. And it was incredible. We had 7, I believe it was 7 in this first cohort that graduated, and they got the certifications listed. They also received a stipend through the city of Tacoma as part of a jobs 253 program. And it was a great opportunity. As we presented the certificates and that, and our apprenticeship coordinator explained some of the benefits that they had received or they could receive if they went out and were dispatched. We actually had some parents come up and talk to us about how to get into the laborer's apprenticeship program. I mean, and it was just a great opportunity and a great example of coming together and working as partners across the board. The program was suspended for this year due to the COVID environment, but we're certainly looking forward to deepening our partnerships next year in 2021 and doing this again. So that's all I got.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers, and I'm now going to turn it over to Deborah for the Q&A portion.
Yes, thanks, Tori. And yeah, thank you to all our speakers. Especially thank you for sticking to your suggested time for speaking. We're going to have a lot of time for Q&A, which is great. So a couple questions that have come through. One question is about, with the pandemic, are people at the national level or at the state level, is there some kind of a back to work template or process that's being developed for the local workforce boards? I guess this is a question for Ron primarily.
Yeah, that's a really good question. To a large extent, the answer would be no. The 2,300, in a sense, retail locations that the boards operate across the country, some of them never closed. Their local elected officials ruled that they were essential services, so they never closed. There were other centers that stayed open for staff. So I know in the Delta, the workforce board in the Delta region, Mitzi's crew worked 2 shifts a day in order to maintain good distance and to work on assisting people with unemployment insurance claims. So in a sense, they never closed. A number of the others, did the same thing, rotating staff. Obviously, a lot has gone virtual. I think, Katie, I don't know whether you guys are open to the public, or if you're doing a system of, many of them are going to a system of appointments. You can call, you'll get an appointment to come in. But, overall, no, we have continued to caution the boards that because of the variance in state and local regulation with regard to business openings, they need to pay attention to those directives. We're happy to help on an individual basis, but we've not issued anything like this is what you must do.
Got it. Thank you. Another question that actually just that I have, but I think other people might be wondering as well. You know, when you talk about, this is, I guess, for all three speakers, when you talk about, you know, business to business relationships and, you know, an emphasis on the private sector, is there any difference in how you would interact with, say, a water or wastewater utility that is part of the local government? Are they able to come to you as an entity that's within the government and get this kind of support, or is it a little bit, does the relationship change then?
I know, Katie, if you want to jump in on that, I could talk in general, but Katie, if you want to talk about your local and Nate.
Sure. I will, yes, I will give it a shot and then certainly ask people to chime in. You know, the short answer is no, it does not necessarily change that level of service. I often jump between saying business and employer. You know, what is true is that we have a number of nonprofit and community-based organizations who are large employers in our region. And if we are in service to job seekers, young people, adults, dislocated workers, for whom there is right role and right fit there, then we are also in service to those employers. So, you know, the short answer is no, and then there's a longer answer. But you know, there may be some nuance there, but it's not significant in terms of service to employers. But you know, Ron, please chime in from a national at a regulation level. I should preface this with I'm in my third month in this role, and so I'm learning as I go.
And Katie is doing a fantastic job being here for only one full quarter. And we there really isn't a difference. Like Katie said, it's employer and not necessarily business, and whatever the nuance is for your local area. I know, for example, the Tacoma School District at the beginning of the well, this was last year. They were having trying to find folks just to do food service last year, and staffing the cafeterias. And one of the resources that they used was they walked into the Workforce Central and put that on Workforce Radar so they could help find and recruit the quality people that they need to do the food service. It's about the employer and the worker relationship, and seeing that those jobs and those needs are met and filled.
Yeah, I think that's those are good points. I think, Deborah, the short answer, again, I'd have to agree with Katie, is no. When you're talking about the skills that as an employer you need, no, the conversation is about those skills. Some of the nuance of how you may do that are going to differ depending on is the authority a part of city government or county government, or are they a separate entity? Many of them across the country are. How you do the mechanisms of work-based learning. Like I know there are projects across the country between workforce boards and municipalities with regard to apprenticeship, because there are skills that can be apprenticeable. You know, it may be participating in that journeyman training at the community college, or it may be provided by a union apprenticeship program. But no, the short answer is no, not when you're having this conversation about skill need to employment opportunity.
Great, thank you. And you mentioned apprenticeship. There's a couple questions related to apprenticeship. So one for Nate, someone commented that it sounds like the Tacoma program that you described is sort of a pre-apprenticeship program. Would that be an accurate way to characterize it?
It's not. The pre-apprenticeship program is a formalized, credentialed type of program, at least in Washington State. And so, no, but it does give the folks that go through it some skills and credentials so that they can go and enter into apprenticeship program. So yes, no, if that's an answer that I can give there.
No, that's fine. And another question related to this is, have you guys seen, in your experience, have you, as workforce boards, have you helped water systems with creating kind of custom apprenticeship programs where, it's not necessarily, just an electrician. It's an electrician, slash instrumentation specialist, or, maybe a mechanic, but it's specifically, for the type of things you see in water and wastewater plants.
That's an excellent, it's a really good question, because the tools that Katie has available to her around work-based learning are multiple tools. So there's things like incumbent worker training. So you have a worker, you want to expand his or her skill sets, that's a possibility. Customized training, on the job training is, comes to mind as a potential. I know there are several boards. I know the board in Washington, D.C. I want to say Prince George's County, Maryland, has done extensive work with the Water Authority. So those two programs that I would point to in D.C. prior to the pandemic, they had an academy that had the utility companies as a part of that. I know there was a solar installation company that was a part of that. I think the IBEW was a part of that. So they actually had an entire center really devoted toward the utilities and water, including water. But I think there are tools that are available. There are some consortiums. West Michigan has put together a consortium of small size manufacturing companies. The board actually wrote the apprenticeship plan. The board filed the plan. The board is the reporting entity for these, and I'm going to say it's probably a dozen small manufacturing companies. So there's a lot of tools that the board has in its toolbox. And I see a comment. Yeah, Washington State has a program. Evergreen Rural Water. So that's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So there are options. Yes.
Yeah. Can I add to that?
Mm-hmm.
I think I would add sort of philosophically, yes, there are options, and I would say, while we are federally funded, at least in large majority, and that may seem to preclude us from innovating and thinking differently. That is not true. I know and have heard and have participated in so many examples where local employers have come and used workforce boards to say, we know we need this skill set. This is an upskill venture or a reskill venture. We need to recruit a handful of employees and create a pathway. And workforce boards have been able to innovate in some really creative ways to invest in and align with the needs of those employers. And so I would just say in general, if you are an employer on the call, take those ideas to your workforce board because there is some innovative thinking and out of the box investment in whether it's formal pre-apprenticeship or even informal, and as Nate's example illustrates, pathway development that boards can support with.
Great, thank you. A related question to this, that one person from Santa Cruz County has said that for their workforce development board, they have there's priority skill areas that have been identified in their strategic plan. What exactly, what does that mean in terms of allocation of resources? If something is a priority skill area, does that mean that it gets gets more funding, or and I'm not sure if that's a term that's just specific to that local board, or is that something that that is pretty common across all the boards?
It's a great question. Again, I'll let Katie fill in how they do it, but one of the things that WIOA really institutionalized, if you will, is that a number of the boards across the country were working in different industry sectors. And then that's been codified in the law. In the planning process, the board must look at the labor shed. They must look at the businesses that are there. And yeah, there's not enough money to go around. So they've got to make strategic decisions about which of those sectors are critical. And the criticality of a sector is really that local board or that regional board, because maybe it's a collaborative effort of 2 or 3 boards. That definition of criticality is really that boards. There are some boards, when I was in Pittsburgh, we actually favored, because if you think back about a decade in Pittsburgh, we were contending with the steel industry collapsing. We were looking at startups. How do we work with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, Allegheny Network? How do we work with startups around technology? Carnegie Mellon University calls Pittsburgh home. So we really looked at what was critical in our region. We recognized that these startups, that the tech industry, advanced healthcare was really critical. So that became a priority for Three Rivers. So the region really, this labor market data really is important. I'll tell you one other outcome of why labor market information and why the work that Katie and the board do there is critical. In the Carl Perkins 5, wasn't a reauthorization, Carl Perkins 5, which is how we fund career and technical education in the US, says to the career and tech system, hey, you gotta follow WIOA here. You've got to focus on what kind of credential does that student have, or how far along the credential process when they graduate from high school. And by the way, you're training in areas that the board determines as critical to your region. So yes, how that skill set, how that credential ends up on that priority list is a really important process. And it starts, and again, I'll let Katie explain how they do it, but it starts with this analysis of what's happening in our region, what's happening in the labor market here.
I'll add that for Pierce County, we focus more on priority sectors and priority industries, which, in light of COVID, need a strong refresh. But it is true that there is some local autonomy in terms of identifying and articulating priorities. I would also say if your workforce board is doing its job as in service to the community, they are inquiring and asking for community-wide feedback as those priorities are identified. And so I can speak for us to say that if any entity in the community, employer and or group of job seekers came forward to make a case for a priority industry or a priority skill set, in your case, that would be taken very seriously by our board. And those priorities do in large part drive investments. And that is local authority making those decisions. And so your voice in that certainly matters.
It does. And I think, Katie, absolutely, it goes back to the point about who's sitting on the board. Because what I see as one of the critical things for local board members is that they understand the trends and issues in their industry and the kinds of trends and issues that impact their ability to sustain, to grow. And I would think that being a part of that conversation with critical industries in your region and pointing out infrastructure, or the infrastructure is important, connecting that with your local elected officials and with your board members around how important those skill sets are. I think it's part of that. part of it is advocating to the people who sit on the boards.
And we do, our board has really dug deep in this. We assigned a future of work task force to say, hey, what's this going to look like? What is our workforce and work environment going to look like in 5 years or 10 years down the road as we see the increase of artificial intelligence and robots? And how is that going to impact our main sectors here in Tacoma, Pierce County that are retail, logistics, and construction, as well as medical? Those are our top 4 sectors. How are all those things going to impact that workforce and the future workforce? And so how do we do that? And it's been an interesting conversation because we bring in people outside of the workforce board and business leaders and labor leaders and government economists to track and try to predict where we're going on that. So it's complex, and one of the pieces that is coming out of there is kind of 11 different skills that can be applied across the board. I mean, they're not credentialed things, but things that we look for in a workforce and quality employees.
Great, thank you. One topic I want to make sure we get to is there's a couple questions about small water systems. And so a small water system maybe has just one operator that they need to replace, and they have maybe a staff of 3 or 4 people total. How would you recommend that a small entity like that get involved with the board? Who typically leads the effort from a water system side? Is it public affairs, HR, and also with the local boards, do they, for the most part, reach out into the rural areas of like for Tacoma, for example? Or do you have to be kind of in a major metropolitan area to have access to this?
Washington State has regional workforce boards. So ours is Tacoma, Pierce County, and there's another one down south. It's like Intermountain or Olympic Intermountain. So depending upon how your state is organized, there might be other opportunities, other subsets of those boards, kind of like what Ron was saying earlier in his presentation.
Yeah, I think one of the ways, and
Yeah.
so as long as it's just us all hanging out together and nobody says anything to my staff, it's your national association, calling over to us. I mean, one of the things that we're working on right now, we're trying to work on very hard, are our partnerships with some of the learning providers in order to figure out, is there kind of the basics that can be done through e-learning or through m-learning, and then how is that put on us to make that available to the boards across the country, so that there's some basics that are being provided across the country, and then you can go do the very specific kind of things with maybe an on-the-job training contract, a short on-the-job training contract for maybe what fills that in. I think nationally, to your question, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about to what extent can we do e-learning, and at what point in time, how do we work to establish proficiency? So where is that hands-on exam that you need to do? Where is that demonstration? So I think, we're not, I don't think we're obviously all of us want us to be, but I think we've learned an enormous amount since March about the ability. And yes, we do cover, one of the things that you saw in my slide is that a lot of our conversation on Capitol Hill revolves around, the lack in the U.S. of accessible, high-speed, reliable broadband. And that's not just in rural territory. Many of our urban workforce boards come back at me about, the internet deserts, if you will, that exist in large cities. So there are big issues in the workforce development industry that we need to address, and we continue to push federally, and people like Katie and the Washington Association, Workforce Board Association, headed up by Kevin Perkey. They push that at the state level.
Great, thank you. And so would you say then that, and this is a little bit of a leading question, sorry, but would you say then that, small water and drinking water and wastewater utilities, they should not feel intimidated by the board, that they should, feel free to contact them, even if their staffing needs are one person and not 50 people?
Yeah, because I think, again, I think it comes back to the tools that Katie has to do that, that on-the-job training contract for an individual to, do a customized training. Again, you may have that employee that has 4 of the 5 credentials or certifications you need. They just need that one more. So no, you shouldn't feel intimidated about going to the local workforce board and talking about your situation. How can you solve that? Because you all are you're pretty essential.
We like to think so.
It's why we're so excited about the partnership with EPA, and the conversations we're having. You guys are essential. You're sort of, if the labor market works and employers are finding qualified applicants, the world's great. And then, well, who's a workforce board? And then when it's not working so well, it's like, well, who is my workforce board? You guys are the same way. When I turn the water on and it's on, hey, great. But when it's not on, like, what do you mean there's a water main break? Like, where are you guys? What are you doing out there?
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that people take for granted when it's working well.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please.
I would just remind everyone that we as workforce boards are established and here to serve our communities. That is our charge through WIOA and the federal funds that we receive. And that service does not discriminate based on the size of your business or organization or the scope of your need. And so that's critical for us. We are here to serve.
Great, thank you. I figured that was the answer, but wanted to make sure that was emphasized. Nate, a question for you. Do you have any advice for other groups that are looking to partner with local schools? Can you talk a little bit more about how the school became involved in your project and how that partnership kind of began?
It's a Tacoma story. Somebody was probably out drinking and they got into a conversation with the person next to them, and that's how the partnership started. But reaching out to the CTE component of the school, the folks that do the
What's CTE? Sorry.
Technical education side, and talking with them, seeing some of the science and math, some of the science teachers within the school district would be another place to do it. Initiating the conversation can happen on either side, but it's just reaching out and starting it. That's it. There's no magic about it, and then seeing what's possible. Like Katie has said, and Ron and this whole presentation, it's about partnerships, and it's about having those conversations.
Got it. Thank you. One question that has come from a couple people in different forms is you refer a lot to the data that you have about what skill sets are missing and what jobs need to be filled. Can you clarify a little bit where that data is coming from?
Sure. I will. It's one of the things we're learning. First of all, let me say the rock of labor market data, no matter where you get it, is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We are really blessed in the US to frankly have the world's gold standard around labor market information. I do some work in Canada, and it's much more difficult to do some of the analysis because it's a voluntary system. Here it's not, and so BLS data, Bureau of Labor Statistics data, is critical. I think in addition, most workforce boards, I call it triangulation, but could be more than that. Most of the boards operate with multiple data sources. So you have boards that would have a contract with a company out of Moscow, Idaho called EMSI. You'd have boards that would have contracts with like Chamara, Burning Glass, the Fourth Economy. So they have other views of the labor market. Some of them have begun to develop their own labor market data around commute patterns, real commute patterns. Who's coming into the one stop? Where are they coming from? What industries? What geography? So they will triangulate that. We did a webinar yesterday with Dun & Bradstreet. There are boards that are using Dun & Bradstreet in collaboration with their economic development partners to look at what business sectors to do what Katie was talking about. How do we determine what sectors are critical in our region? And then they're looking at the Dun & Bradstreet data to see the health of those industry sectors. And so they're making strategic decisions about how do they approach those. In Vegas just has published a report called Blueprint 2.0. It was a collaborative of the Chamber, Economic Development, and the Vegas Workforce Board. So they really have. It's a great report, Katie. If you want it, I'll connect you to Jaime. But it's a great report, very in depth about what the situation is in terms of employment, and in terms of looking at the demographics of the labor force that's in Vegas. So there are multiple data sources that a local board's employing.
Got it. Thank you. One question that I want to make sure we get to is, we've talked a lot about state workforce boards and how they trickle down to local workforce boards, but we have quite a few, tribal water utilities located on tribal nations, and we see that, especially in these communities, there's a big shortage of qualified water and wastewater operators. Is there, how do businesses or entities on tribal lands interact with workforce boards? Is there something that's applicable to them, or can you just speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think when you talk about the tribal workforce boards, there would be two, to a great extent, there is a national set aside for the tribes. So in many cases, the tribes are a direct contractor to the U.S. Department of Labor. So there would be funds specifically set aside for the tribe. I think that's also where the state workforce board is. They look at statewide issues. That's, I think, one of the things that they can help do is tie together groups that may have a disparate geography inside the state. They can help convene and coordinate that. And then I think, I don't want to say to a lesser extent, but then also remember you have the local boards that would interact with the tribes in a state.
Okay, so there are local boards located on tribal lands.
Yes, the tribes themselves will have, in many cases, will have a workforce development component to the tribal government.
Got it. And these can be found on the same website that you showed earlier?
That's a really good question, Deborah. It just sort of popped in my mind as well. Hey, I wonder how I found the tribes. I know there are set-asides. I will get that answer to you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Sure.
And finally, yeah, one last question, and reminder, if we haven't answered your question live, we will be sending the remaining questions to the speakers and getting everyone their answers, so don't worry. But I want to make sure you get to this one. Are there any funding dates and deadlines that local boards have that people, employers should be aware of when they're trying to leverage funds that might be available?
I think, I don't know, Katie, do you have a timeline on your plan, or do you have a timeline that you guys that you all look at your eligible training providers and occupations?
We don't have a standard timeline. What I would suggest is subscribing to your local workforce board, you know, if they have a newsletter or updates, or even just I would be surprised if every board didn't, that's how I should state that, have a section on their website where current requests for proposals or requests for qualifications are posted, or opportunities for funding are posted, and those are updated regularly. So I would say get on a newsletter where you're getting pings of when those come out. They come out frequently and often, but I would also say don't wait for an opportunity for funding or partnership to come out. I have seen so often, you know, a business or an education entity come to a workforce board, and out of that alignment comes a request for proposals or a funding opportunity. And so certainly sign up with your local board for newsletters and keep tabs on website, but also don't wait for that. You have the power to create that funding opportunity as well.
Got it. Great. Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you to our three panelists. It's been really, really interesting, and only the beginning of working more between EPA, Office of Water, and workforce boards. I also want to thank all of our attendees. You guys had great questions. We will be, answering the rest of the questions as well, so don't worry if we didn't get to yours. Now I'm going to pass it over to Tori for some last wrap-up items.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and thank you so much to our panelists. That was an exciting Q&A, and I'm glad that we had a lot of time to do that. So right now, we just have two closing polls that I'd like to just open for everyone. We do a number of these workforce webinars with varying topics, and we just kind of want to get a sense of, how would you rate them? So on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the best score and 1 being the worst, how would you rate today's webinar? And you should see a polling box pop up for you to insert your answer. Again, if you don't see that polling box, you can always chat in your answer as well. And I'll give people a couple of seconds to answer that. Thank you. And I'll give about 10 more seconds. All right, thank you so much for voting. And the next question that we have, and this can be an ongoing discussion, but as we're forecasting the different webinars that we'll be doing in December 2020 and then again in 2021, what other topics would you like to see covered in these webinars? If you have any topics that you would recommend, any speakers that you think would be great for our webinar series, please let us know. We'll be planning these out, and of course, we'll be sending those. So as you chat in any topics that you'd like to hear, again, want to thank our speakers so much for joining us today. Great information, great presentations, and thank you all so much. And for everyone for attending, thank you for taking time out of your hectic schedules. We'll be sending out a copy of the presentation slides. We'll be sending out the recordings, and we'll also be sending out kind of like a one-page flyer that includes our past webinars that also has links for recordings and the slides. So if you have some extra time on your hands and you're thinking, oh, I wonder how the other webinars went, you're more than welcome to review those. So thank you all so much, and thank you to our speakers, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you all.